The Empress returns, by Iowa Forever. Chapter 2.11 In the Hall of the Dark God. The first thing Celestia notices upon regaining focus is that she is lying down, her body half submerged in liquid. She opens her eyes, shifting her head to prevent the liquid from splashing in her eyes, and reaches out with her soul to determine where she is within the warp. It is a hall, or at least a constructive one. It rises above her like the ruins of Everfree, broken from time and neglect. Flickering lights of warp beasts come and go, eyeing her as she remains submerged in a puddle of. She pauses and looks down, quickly scrambling to her feet when she realizes what she has landed in. Blood. A thick puddle of blood that rises up to her shins. It stretches to fill the cavernous hall, bending and clotting around ruins and other debris. Even within a realm where physical sense matters little, the place reeks, Celestia's nose scrunching as she channels her powers to dry herself off. It is then that she realizes her spirit is unarmored, exposed even. Only the image of her body remains, caked in blood that is not her own and surrounded by ruins of a dead empire. A chill comes over her, and she is no longer alone. How does it feel to stand in the shoes of those that came before you? The voice whispers, drifting around her like a specter. To be naked, exposed, defenseless, weak? I am not weak, demon, Celestia counters, turning to face the voice but finding only shadows. If you have any intelligence about you, you would know who I am. Oh, I know very well who you are, Empress, the voice chuckles. In fact, I probably know you better than you do. You say you are a beacon of strength, but you cannot even swat a particularly bothersome insect from your mind. What kind of strength is that? Show yourself, and then we will see how hollow your claim of strength is. You amuse me, Empress. But you are still weak. Celestia cannot react before something slams into her back, sending her sprawling into the blood once more. She catches herself, growling before spinning and releasing a blast of energy, but all she strikes is air as the voice cackles. Did I strike a nerve? Your very existence strikes a nerve, demon. Celestia growls, rising back up to her feet and drying herself again. How very petty of you. But then, that is what I have struggled with for an eternity. The voice drifts away. Come. Would you like to see true strength? I have so much to show you before you must leave. I am no slave to you. But you will still come. I know you, Empress, and your curiosity cannot be so easily suppressed. Celestia grimaces, but the voice says nothing more. She pauses only to focus her power, her mental shields raising while her soul perceives her armor closing in around her. Fully defended once more, Celestia steps through the mire, blood flowing around her legs as she searches for solid ground and her foe. The warp around her is calm. Far too calm for this universe, Celestia keeping her defenses up in case anything tries to surprise her. She keeps walking, searching for her opponent, but all she finds is ruins and more blood, the slosh of fluid being the only sound she has. She looks about, furrowing her brow as she senses nothing but more blood. The great game is broken, old gods cast aside. Celestia freezes as she hears a new voice echoing through the ruins. She summons her sword, flames enveloping her as she prepares for an attack, but all that greets her is a rush of wind and emotions, directing her vision to a section of the ruins that she had ignored. 4 heads, staked to the wall by pikes of blackened steel. Each one appears to have rotten for centuries, yet still drips fresh blood from their wounds. The stench mingles with the reek of the blood, an acidic smell that causes Celestia to step back. Instinct tells her to fight, to strike against this symbol of carnage, but Celestia finds herself fixated on the spot, watching the slow rot of her greatest enemies. It was simply a matter of picking up where you left off, the voice whispers behind Celestia. Each gate that Lorgar opened gave me strength enough to slay these fools and devour their realms. Impossible, Celestia breathes. Killing the 4 gods of chaos would throw the warp into complete disarray. Even my attempt left the warp mostly destroyed and cast me to parts unknown. The voice cackles again. Silly Empress, it says. When you conquer a planet, do you immediately raze it to the ground? Do you not repurpose its resources so they become yours? I slew the chaos gods and took their power for my own, and the channels of reality provided me all I needed to bind their slaves to my will without alerting your little bands of followers. It would have been seamless save for one message. The game is broken, only destruction remains. Celestia searches for her opponent once more, but all she can find is more blood and the rotting corpses of the 4. That would also explain why you were able to face the hive mind on its own footing, for what is the power of 1 god compared to 5? An excellent observation, no? The voice asks. Perhaps that is how you managed to convince so many idiots that you were worth following. It certainly fits you, dear Empress. If you seek to get under my skin by insulting me and my subjects, you are wasting your time, demon. Remember, you would not be in this position of power were it not for my strength. Ha! You are a tired old man trapped in a body that is not their own. The four allowed you to win so they would be rid of you. Who are you, that you cannot even harm your greatest enemies permanently? Celestia can feel a presence drifting around her, yet she can still see no one to speak to. She braces in case the voice tries to push her again, but it seems content to talk. Unlike them, I knew you would return. I knew your ties to this empire are stronger than any other bonds. A pity, then, that I must sever such a strong relationship. You will fail. Celestia replies. Thousands of years and countless days of assault could never overcome me, even when the four were still alive. For all your strength, even you cannot break me. So certain are you? I still stand before you, unbowed and unharmed. Seeing as you merely killed the four and the hive mind outright, you do not strike me as a sadist, so you are not toying with me before delivering the final strike. So either you brought me here merely to gloat and display a puffed up semblance of power, or you really do not think you have the strength to overcome me. No sooner has Celestia finished that a wall of force slams into her stomach. She lets out a gasp of air as she is sent sprawling back, shattering the wall on which rests the heads of the four. Is this a satisfactory display of strength, Empress? The voice bellows. Celestia can say nothing before something closes around her neck, Celestia shifting her energy to keep from breaking focus on her soul. I am beyond you. I can destroy your soul with but a thought, and your precious Imperium will die with you. Why don't you? Celestia asks. There is a pause before the pressure on her soul releases, the presence backing away from her. In time, Empress, the voice says. There is still more that must transpire before we are to have our final battle. As amusing as it would be to crush you now, I find myself to be a patient god. As one who has been mistaken for a deity most of my life, I do not find you to be a very convincing specimen. As you are a weakling, it would be like you to say that. Celestia feels the presence leaving her. A thought comes to mind, just one question to probe her enemy's weaknesses. If you truly are beyond me, she says. Perhaps you would be so noble as to offer me a name by which I might address my better? There is a pause, the presence lingering before it drifts back to her. That, Empress, is a question you already know the answer to. Celestia gasped as she was forced back to reality, pulling herself from the command chair and staggering forward. The officers on the bridge stepped back, keeping their distance lest Celestia lash out and crush one under her armored bulk. Celestia took a few deep breaths, just enough to calm herself now that her body and soul were reunited. Celestia trembled, a chill running down her back. She could still feel the creature, chaos god or not, looming over her as she recovered. She tried to keep her mental shields raised, just in case it decided to come back in force, but it merely watched. And all Celestia could do was try and pull herself together, to be the calm figurehead the Imperium needed. They need their Empress, she thought. Not someone easily winded by the warp. Status report, she said, straightening up as best she could. We have just entered space around Rin's world. One officer said. We are at 3% casualties from warp transit. And well, all the Tyranid ships are dead. I am well aware of that. Celestia replied. What of our forces on the ground? Status unknown, the officer said after swallowing. Our systems are picking up unusual energy spikes coming from New Rin City. We believe a warp portal might be forming on the surface. One of those gates the demon mentioned? Celestia thought. Prep the teleportarium, and have all units be ready to deploy. Celestia growled, turning towards the exit. I will go ahead of them to make sure this ends quickly. Lorgar stepped lightly around the corpses of Tyranids. The insects all had the same dull expression as one another, staring blankly into the void as their life force was torn asunder. The Dark God had done its work well, and now it was up to Lorgar to solidify its claim over the Imperium. As all things should be. He stopped on the bank of the river, looking to the defense line guarding the northern half of New Rin City. The Imperial stare was just as dumbstruck as the Tyranids, mortals and cowards gaping as they tried to comprehend what had just transpired. Lorgar smirked, thankful that the perfect audience had been delivered to him on this day. Slaves of the Imperium. He called, raising the Book of Chaos towards the sky. The hive mind is dead, slain by the Dark God Ascendant. Hear now the truth of chaos, and the death of your empire of lies. With his other hand he gestured towards the corpses of the Tyranids with his mace. Look upon your enemies, you servants of a dead god. See how with but a word the Dark God has slain what all your guns and swords could not. This is the might of chaos, might that you have glimpsed and thus will dread to face. Chaos is the truth that unites us all, but you are too blinded by your false faith to see it. Do you not take pleasure in such a great victory, find comfort in the strength of arms and camaraderie that brought you to this point? Why deny the full embrace of chaos, which honors and empowers those very emotions which you have felt since you first began your battle against the hive mind? Do you truly think your emperor has slain these beasts, that your own shreds of faith were what saved you this day? The dark god is responsible for all of your triumph. It is the embodiment of man, the purest form of the base desire that lies within us all. You say that you are in control, but every action you take is praise to the dark god ascendant, the four brought into one, the warp made manifest. Your emperor is but a false god, stealing your worship and leaving you to rot alone and forgotten. Cast off your chains, slaves, and become what you were truly meant to. Oh, would you just shut up already? It took most of Lorger's 15,000 years of experience as a preacher to not sputter as a new figure stepped out of the imperial lines. It was a young woman, dressed in lavender and gold armor and wielding a silver sword, and her scowl was quite apparent even from across the river. Your dark god had nothing to do with today's events. Ah, a naysayer. This will be amusing. You doubt what you see, do you not? Lorger asked before gesturing back to the corpses around him. Look around. Can you so flatly deny what you see before you? Did you pray for your emperor's deliverance before you went to sleep and now seek to justify your little farce? You delude yourself with false worship to a god that cannot hear you, when there is one who will gladly accept your worship. That doesn't mean anything, the woman said. What does matter is that you're lying to these people, and quite badly too. Truth of chaos? Humans being beholden to their base emotions? You really know nothing about life, do you? I have beheld chaos and order for 15,000 years, child, Lorger said. Time and again I have seen men deny themselves, only to be liberated once they embrace chaos. No pretense, no lies to oneself, only the truth of who they really are. No. There was a pause before the girl winked out with a blink of purple light, Lorger taking a small step back as she teleported in front of him. What you offer is a means where humans can never truly grow. Humanity's greatest strength isn't surrendering to base instincts, but rising above and mastering them. Your offer would just turn them all into a bunch of brainless monsters with no desires, no ambition. You would think that, but the freedom of chaos is such that you would never be bound by the limitations of mortal morality and existence. Lorger dismissed the Book of Chaos and held a hand towards the woman. You are one of great magic skill, no? You must be, for your voice enhancement spell and teleportation is magic few have ever mastered. Would you not welcome a chance to grasp true power, to learn spells and rituals that mere mortals could never comprehend? Knowledge and power not glimpsed in eons rests within my grasp, and it can be yours too if you so desire. The woman seemed unconvinced, but Lorger could see a flicker of interest in her eyes. Yes, you understand, Lorger said, smiling. Chaos is more than just violence and bloodshed. It is knowledge, truth. You would be unbound by all constructs of law, all limits that you place upon yourself. I do not offer slavery, but freedom, freedom to choose what path you shall follow and make a true name for yourself. Boundless power is yours, if only you can reach it. Fascinating, but I'm the personal student of the Empress herself. The woman said, giving Lorger a friendly smile. If there was anything I ever needed help with, I could always ask her. Lorger frowned. The temptation to smash this woman into the mud and get back to his sermon flared in his mind, but a good evangelist knew that some converts needed more work than others. You place too much trust in your emperor, girl, Lorger spat. He will only betray you when the time is convenient, and what will you be left with? Shattered promises and misplaced loyalty to a petty dictator who only cares about himself. You obviously haven't spent a whole lot of time around her, have you? The girl asked. Yes, there have been times when she has allowed her pettiness to come forward, but to focus solely on that is to deny all the rest of who she is. Can your dark god possess the power to move a star with a flick of their wrist, yet with that same flick be gentle enough to dry a tear from the eye of a sad child? Can it mend a broken heart or calmly correct a wrong, rather than just providing an out for one to indulge themselves without actually growing from the experience? You place your trust in a man that slaughtered innocents on a whim, Lorger snapped. Can you fault Monarchia, where thousands of faithful just like you were killed for no greater reason than the Emperor was displeased with them? I won't deny that she wasn't a good person in the past, the woman said, still calm despite the increasingly angry Primarch looming over her. But she has worked to make amends, even if it takes her the rest of her life to do so. And how did you respond? Seems like you just ran off to find something that would make you feel better rather than actually solving the problem between the two of you. Was following some dark god that only seems to care about you debasing yourself really worth it? That does not change the fact that the Dark God was responsible for the victory you see here, Lorgar said, pointing back to the corpses. To deny that fact is to deny all reason entirely. It was by the power of chaos that you claimed victory, not your emperor. No, it was the spirit of humanity that won us this battle. The woman said, her hands balling into fists. Where was your Dark God when the walls of this city fell? Where were you when thousands of men, women, and children died in the face of an alien monstrosity? Yet despite all that we held out, we fought and died to save what was left, and where were you? Just waiting on the sideline for a convenient time to show up? Just admit it, you don't actually care about humanity at all, you just want to get people to bow down to you and your coward god instead of making something better for themselves. Your emperor has not shown his face to rescue you, and yet you accuse me of cowardice? I know for a fact that the Empress is on her way to assist us. I can't say I have too much faith in your Dark God who doesn't even have the courtesy or timing to be genuinely useful. Lorgar's hand tightened around his mace. He was about to bring it down on the woman's head before she disappeared in a flash of purple light, reappearing safely on the other side of the river as she turned to face her fellow Imperials. Don't listen to this guy, Lorgar heard her say. He wants you to forsake the Empress for his own pleasure. We stand strong and united against all threats, and will continue to stand when the Empress arrives. Ours is a strength no false god can overcome, but he's too much of a fool to realize what he's given up. I threw off the shackles of slavery, Lorgar bellowed. I made a choice. I chose to throw away the reins of a murderer and a coward, to become a true herald for humanity. Your emperor will betray you, your strength will fail and you will see that I was right. Not this false prophet who leads you astray, me. You gave up one ruler for another who likes it better when you act like some kind of animal rather than an actual human being. The woman countered. If you're a true herald of humanity, I'd hate to think we're all destined to be shambling monsters. A pause. Though, how exactly does one get to look like you? The Empress really didn't go into depth about the mutagenic properties of the warp, so I want to have a good idea of what it does from one victim so we can all avoid it. Now she was taunting him. Launching a doom bolt across the river to kill the false prophet would be the easiest method of dealing with her, but the demon Primarch would not let her taunting get to him that easily. He would not. So, you seem content to follow your false emperor, he said finally, taking a few breaths to compose himself. A pity, for one as strong as you could perform miracles if only you opened your mind to the truth. But if you will not do so willingly, then perhaps I must force you to accept the will of the Dark God. With that, Lorgar raised his hand toward the sky, channeling his power to interact with the magics coming from the 10th gate. There was a pause before the sky over the central spire ripped open, a purple and red gash tearing through reality above the city. Tendrils of arcane energy snaked down from the rift, twisting about like some great beast reaching out towards the mortals below. A low drone filled the air, small ripples forming on the surface of the river Rin as the drone bored into the planet itself. The tendrils began to take more solid shapes. Bodies, arms, heads, weapons, all stitching together piece by piece until the horde had formed around Lorgar. Scantily clad demonettes cackled as they prepared for a coming slaughter, joined by giggling balls of energy that made up a variety of pink and blue horrors. Corpse-like plague-bearers shambled forward with rusted knives and pus-covered swords, and leading the charge was a great throng of bloodletters, the demons roaring as they brought their flame-covered hellblades to bear. Demons of all shapes and sizes stormed out of the rift. The only common denominator they had among themselves was a single black mark set in the center of their foreheads. Kill all the non-believers, Lorgar said. Slaughter them without remorse, for your Dark God commands it. But bring the false prophet to me alive, so I may show her the folly of her ways. The demons howled and charged forward, the water of the river solidifying under their feet as they rushed the Imperial lines. The Loyalists opened fire almost immediately, but there was only so much the weapons of reality could do against the legions of the warp. Lorgar did not move to join them, instead watching as demon and man crashed against one another. A sight of the false prophet fighting a hopeless battle against what she should have accepted would have been nice, but other matters called. Lorgar, the voice of the Dark God echoed through his mind. What are you doing? Dealing with a particularly troublesome false prophet, my lord. Lorgar replied. Once she is done away with, thousands shall bow before you. While I am flattered by your devotion, there are other matters to deal with, the Dark God said. Return to the Cadian Gate and summon your brothers. It is time that we show the Imperium the true might of chaos. Lorgar hesitated. He wanted to be sure that the false prophet was captured, but the callings of the Dark God. At your command, my lord. Lorgar turned from the battle, summoning a smaller warp portal to cross into. The demons paid him no mind, staying focused on the battle ahead as the Lord of the Word Bearer stepped back into the warp and out of sight. Just as Lorgar closed the portal behind him, a shimmering column of light began to form where he had stood. Under most circumstances, Celestia would have brought at least some of her companions with her when going into combat. She was powerful, not stupid, and with the warp as it was, it would be prudent to take all possible precautions. But Johnson, Corax, and Twilight were in danger. Patience could wait. Celestia opened her eyes once she had finished her teleport to the surface of Rin's world. Dead Tyranids littered the island she had arrived on, with various demons and other warp beasts scrambling over the corpses in search of new victims. Off to her right she could hear gunfire from the Imperial lines, matched by the various howls and war cries of the demons as they rushed to take more souls into the warp. The sky directly above the spire had been torn asunder by a great rift, the warp itself spilling over into reality with maddening images and lights. It bore into her, the presence of the dark god pulsing at the edge of her vision as if the foul creature meant to reach down and pull her bodily into the warp. Celestia turned her attention forward. No need to fight the monster on its terms. Celestia did not bother speaking, there was no point in reminding the demons of just who stood in their presence. She merely held her sword at the ready and advanced, focusing her powers so that a cluster of plague-bearers that had not noticed her exploded into fine mist as she drew close. This caught the attention of the horde, most of the lesser creatures recoiling in terror at the mere sight of Celestia while some demonic heralds moved forward to try and restore order. Celestia barely broke stride, whipping her sword about as a curtain of fire formed before her and torched any demon foolish enough to try and close with her. This is what you see as strength? Celestia thought as she readied herself to plunge into the fray. You know nothing, do you, demon? Celestia charged, using her talon hand as a shield as she brought her sword up for a strike. Lesser demons tried to flee, only to be vaporized or crushed by the power she brought to bear. With a yell she swung her sword down, cleaving a herald in half and sending a shockwave through the ranks that knocked down even more of the lesser demons. She drew her sword back and punched with her other hand, a lance blasting through the enemy ranks and sending dozens of warp spawn screaming back to the Imperium. The demons were actively retreating now, some horrors flinging small bolts of warp flame towards Celestia as they scrambled from her gaze. She barely noticed as she advanced, her vision focused entirely on the central spire. A flick of her left hand backwards sent a blast of lightning into a testing horde of bloodletters, the demons bursting as the energy punched through them. Through the mass Celestia could see an opening near the base of the spire, the whole radiating warp energy that tugged at her senses. This must be the source of the warp portal, she thought, whipping her sword around to create another curtain of fire between her and the chaos demons. With the demons held at bay, for now, Celestia stepped through the entrance and into the hallway, a blast of warp flame scouring the walls of any signs of chaotic iconography. You think to stop me like this, Empress? The voice of the dark god asked as Celestia advanced. She could hear more demons scrambling about to try and slow her, but a flex of her hand crushed the entrance closed, leaving her alone as she advanced down the hall. Close the portal if you must, but the damage has been done. I have struck down the hive mind, and will strike your precious Imperium while you can do nothing. Do not think to taunt me, demon. Celestia growled, scowling into the flickering light before her as she advanced. Your show of force is nothing. The Imperium will weather this storm as it is all others, and you will die screaming when I am finished with you. Don't make threats you have no intention of following through on, Empress. You saw what happened to the Tyranids, after all. Celestia said nothing more, stepping into the main hall. Another rift hung in the air before her, passing through the ceiling and up into the spire. Wind whipped through the chamber, tugging at Celestia's hair so much she had to concentrate a small bit of her power to keep it from blinding her. A dull roar filled the room, the sound of 1,000 shrieking souls speaking their doom to Celestia as the power of the warp twisted into real space. Celestia stood in silence, staring down into the void once more. After millennia of seeing the warp as relatively calm, watching as it roiled like this was disconcerting, for lack of a better word. Empress. Celestia blinked as reality returned to her. She turned and saw Corax, the wall having closed in around the Primarch's jump pack and left arm. From the rubble around him he had only just freed his right arm, raking his lightning claws across the stone to free the rest of his body. Corax. She called. What happened here? Never mind that. Corax countered. There's a rune at the base of the rift. Destroy it and the portal should collapse on itself. Celestia nodded, turning her attention to the rift. Faintly she could see the rune Corax spoke of, a glowing symbol that briefly caused her eyes to ache before she shifted her power. Using more of her power to anchor herself in case the dark god tried to attack her, Celestia put her sword away and reached out with her hand, the warp twisting around her hand as she reached out towards the rune. A snap, and Celestia drew her hand back, hissing as steam rose from a rend in her armor. Not enough shielding. I'll have to be careful. Celestia focused again, approaching the rift slower this time to avoid more psychic backlash. The power of the warp pressed against her, as if she were pushing her hand through sand, but Celestia pressed on regardless. Finally she found a break, a weak spot where she could reach the rune and disrupt its power. Celestia closed her hand, a glass-like crunch filling the air as she broke the chaos glyph. 2 seconds later, the spire exploded. Celestia raised her hand above her head, a golden shield forming as thousands of tons of rubble and metal came crashing down on her and Korax. The pinned Primarch raised his free arm in an attempt to defend himself as well, though Celestia was quick to extend her shield to protect him, she hoped. Every impact sent a shudder through Celestia's body, her shield flaring with every strike, but it still held firm. She grimaced, pouring more power into the shield as the spire continued its collapse, the stone beneath her feet cracking from the force bearing down on her. Finally, the onrush of rubble slacked. Celestia kept the shield raised, waiting for the last few pebbles and motes of dust to come to a stop. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see Korax still keeping his arm up in the event something slipped. "Are you all right?" "No injuries beyond my pride," the Primarch mumbled, lowering his arm before continuing. "Lorgar was here." "I see." Celestia looked up at the rubble hovering over her head. "I presume he is a cause in all this chaos." "Not for my lack of trying," Korax replied. "Forgive me, but I was not fast enough to kill the traitor." "You cannot blame yourself for that, Korax," Celestia said, looking back to Korax. "Lorgar has grown crafty since his betrayal, and you did what you could to stop him, I'm sure. For now, we must work with what we have and prepare for the onslaught to come." Lorgar spoke a bit about that. Korax scoffed. "I'm glad he spared me a grand speech, but I presume you have a greater idea of what we face?" Celestia fell silent, looking away for a moment. "When we are fully assembled, I will explain everything," she said. "For now, let's get out of here." With that Celestia pushed, her power flaring against the pile of rubble above her. The stone was tossed away with ease, sunlight beaming down on Celestia and Korax as their prison was undone. That task complete, Celestia refocused her power to the stone surrounding Korax, crumbling his restraints as the Primarch stepped away from the wall. "Thank you, Empress," he said, dusting a few pieces of rubble off his armor. Being stuck there was marginally less annoying than Lorgar's prattling. "I'm sure." Celestia saw that some of the rubble had collapsed against the wall of the room, providing a small ramp she could climb out of. Korax followed behind her, the jump pack apparently damaged from being encased in rock. As Celestia climbed from the hole, she got a good look at the Imperial defenses on the other side of the river. Smoke rose from damaged and destroyed battle tanks, great gouges ripped through fortifications and the ground from alien and demonic weaponry, but Celestia could still see men and women holding the bank, their weapons trained on the other side of the river in case any new threats came to face them. And standing before the ranks, caked in blood that was not her own, was a familiar purple-clad woman. "See? See?" Twilight called, pointing across the river. "Did I not tell you the Empress would come to our aid? The way of chaos is a lie, and only the Empress remains." This drew a roar of praise from the guardsmen, thousands of soldiers raising their weapons in celebration as they sang praises to Celestia, the Astartes, and to Twilight. Celestia watched them in silence, the wind tugging her hair like a war banner, and despite the carnage and stress she found herself smiling at the sight. Twilight's victory would be remembered. Her student had passed with flying colors. Chapter 2.12, Truth. With the Empress's fleet came much-needed supplies, thousands of tons of food and fuel being ferried down to Rindsward to help the surviving civilian population get back on its feet. With nothing left to fight, the Guard and Astartes forces had taken to burning away any remaining Tyranid structures, a thick layer of haze hanging over New Rind City as countless Tyranids were burned to ash. Yet despite the carnage, the loss, the people of Rin's world were in high spirits. And then the student spat in the demon's face, her very words burning its skin with her purity. An older gentleman said to a gathered group of small children. "Away with your lies, O demon! Mine eyes rest upon the Empress, and only by her word shall we show fealty." And with the call of the student, the Empress came down in a pillar of lightning, striking all of the traitors dumb before she and the student cast them back into the Imperium. All the children gave small gasps of excitement, eagerly hanging to their elder's words as he continued his story. None of them noticed Twilight herself passing by, stepping lightly around the celebrating and mourning groups of guardsmen and civilians. Even with her distinct armor she felt invisible, drifting like a ghost from group to group as she slowly worked her way back to Celestia. She watched and listened, taking in the stories of heroism and terror the humans regaled to one another as they sought to bring some semblance of normality back to Rin's world. Normality had long been absent from Twilight's life, but there was no need to deny it to others. Ahead, Twilight could see Celestia speaking with Corax and a few of his Raven Guard, the Primarch looking more dour than usual. Even when covered in dust and whatever it was that demons bled, Celestia was still a magnificent sight, her armor shimmering in the evening sun as the wind tugged at her hair. She did not notice Twilight as she approached, keeping her attention on her son while Twilight waited patiently behind her. Finally, Corax gave a nod and departed, though he seemed more content to walk rather than fly away with his jump pack. Was it damaged? I didn't see Corax during the fighting, so maybe? Princess? Twilight asked, rocking on her heels as Celestia turned to face her. Is now a bad time? Of course not, Twilight, Celestia said, giving Twilight a smile. I always have time for you. I have heard much about your defense of the northern half of the city. Oh really? Twilight sheepishly massaged the back of her head. Just trying to do what you taught me to do. And you did so with such skill and enthusiasm. Celestia stepped forward, kneeling and resting a hand on Twilight's shoulder. Truly, I could not be more proud of you than I am now, Twilight. You have come so far in these last few years, both in Equestria and here in the Imperium, and you continue to impress me with your skill and knowledge. Celestia's smile turned sad. Unfortunately for me, it has come to the point where you have begun to surpass all that I have left to teach you. But I'll still be your student, right? Twilight asked, her hands trembling as she continued on. I really don't feel prepared for something like that, and I could use all the help I can get, especially with all the weird things that keep popping up around here. There is no need to be so concerned, Twilight, Celestia said, her smile returning in full. And you may surprise yourself with how prepared you truly are. Even for a universe as chaotic as this one, I have no doubt that you will continue to shine as a leader in these dark times. Twilight smiled, though it was a rather uneasy smile all things considered. She tried to think of something to say, to assure Celestia that she could keep up and be the woman Celestia thought she was, but the words continued to die in her mouth. Celestia's warm smile was all Twilight needed. Empress? Twilight turned, spotting Matthias coming through the crowd. He was alone, his face set in a concerned frown, but nothing else about his demeanor had changed. May I have a moment of your and Terra's time? Of course, Matthias, Celestia said, turning to face Matthias fully. What may I help you with? Matthias remained silent, wringing his hands together as he mulled over what to say. Maybe it has something to do with the Eldar? Twilight thought, cursing herself for not bringing this up sooner. The two waited for the Inquisitor to speak, but Matthias said nothing as he looked between Twilight and Celestia. Finally, he sighed. I am not sure if Terra told you of this, he started. But we were rescued from the fall of the spaceport by a band of Eldar Harlequins. I see, Celestia said, her face growing stern. I had suspicions the Eldar had interests in this region of space, but it must be considerable if the Harlequins are willing to get involved. There was another pause before Celestia spoke again. Please, continue. They led us through a section of the webway they called the Path of Memories, Matthias said. Apparently, the psychic energies within draw upon the memories of those that pass through them, projecting them for others to witness. Now Matthias looked to Twilight, her heart sinking as his gaze hardened. I saw a few particular memories about your student, enough to learn that she is not who she says she is. Oh no. Matthias, she stammered, shrinking behind Celestia as she continued. I didn't mean to. What do you mean by this, Matthias? Celestia said, her voice calm. What crime do you bring against my student? The fact that she is not human, Matthias said, looking to Celestia. She is a Xenos, a pony by the name of Twilight, whom I believe you have mentored since she was a child, in some form or another. I don't know how she holds the form of a human, but I presume your power is involved in this. Matthias knew. And all Twilight could do was cower. Celestia would not let her come to harm, but Matthias knew, and her presence was not always assured. How long did she have before he tried shooting her? Or would Celestia merely kill him where he stood to keep the secret from getting out? Celestia wouldn't do that. Twilight whimpered. Matthias knew, and all she could do was panic. I see. Celestia replied. This is a serious accusation you make, Inquisitor. Should rumors such as this persist, it could put the stability of the Crusade and the Imperium in jeopardy, and that is a threat I cannot allow. Twilight felt a brief pulse of magic, watching Celestia's hand clench ever so slightly. You seek my judgment, no? As Empress, you are more privy to threats I cannot even comprehend, Matthias said. I want to believe that Twilight is not dangerous. I want to believe that she is an ally, that she has our best interest in mind, but she is a Xenos, and an alien will always put their own interest before that of humanity. That has been the reality the Imperium has faced for the last 15,000 years. Matthias' gaze softened, though his concern did not seem willing to depart. If I am damned, so be it. I just wish an answer from you, Empress. There are few over the course of my life who have ever demanded answers from me in such a way, Celestia said, her eyes narrowing. To put yourself forward and risk my wrath, even with all you believe, that is a trait increasingly rare among mankind. Twilight looked between Celestia and Matthias. She found her hands clenching, the urge to rock on her feet rising within her. Defenses, explanations, lectures on the dangers of xenophobia, all blossomed and died in her mind without any useful fruit. Just more panic. Matthias knows. Twilight is not a threat, Matthias, Celestia continued. She is my student, and she has always placed the good of others before her own self-interest. As of her being a Xenos, they were crafted by my hand during my time of exile, and I am quite fond of them as a result. She raised an eyebrow before continuing. Is that a satisfactory answer, Inquisitor Velas? I accept your judgment, Empress. Matthias closed his eyes. Do with me as you will. I have no intention of killing you, Matthias, Celestia said, her hand twitching again as Twilight felt her magic draw back. You have proven yourself to be a useful and intuitive soldier, and the information you possess is too valuable to risk unwanted attention. This conversation does not leave the three of us until such a time I deem it necessary, and should you willingly leak this information you will die. Twilight winced, but said nothing as Celestia's gaze softened. I do not mean to be so harsh, but I must if I am to protect all that I love. I understand. Matthias replied. There was a pause before Celestia smiled. Thank you for coming to me with your concerns, Matthias, she said. Now, there will be a strategy meeting at 1400 when the Lion arrives. I would like both of you to be there as I have a special task for the two of you in these coming days. Celestia looked between Twilight and Matthias. Now Twilight, is there anything you wish to say to Inquisitor Matthias before we must return to our regular duties? Twilight swallowed. She wanted to say something, anything, but her words continued to fail her. Matthias' expression had not changed much, but his body language did appear more open. Perhaps he actually wanted to move on and hear what Twilight had to say. But he thought I was. 3 years, she said, her voice low as she hung her head. 3 years we've known each other, struggled together. 3 years I thought you were my friend, that I could trust you, and I did trust you. She looked up at Matthias, a tear forming in her eye. 3 years of trust gone because of 1 minute of miscommunication? Twilight, Matthias started. I know things are different from what you are used to. So? After all we've been through, you can't look past the small fact that I am not a full human? Twilight took a step towards Matthias, her hands clenching as she bit back her fear, her frustration. I know how things are here. I know that you and other humans have spent centuries fighting against all manner of horrors and monstrosities. After all that, after all we've done, everything you've said to me and encouraged me with, after all that you thought I was just like them? She trembled, but deep breaths would be enough to keep her calm, for now. Now Matthias took a step back, his face dropping as he tried and failed to meet Twilight's. I couldn't take any risks, he said. So I'm a risk, then? The scared, confused, naive little psyker is as great a risk as a giant hive mind of aliens and a ravenous horde of demons. She let out a long sigh, just enough to keep from screaming as she looked away from Matthias. I thought you were better than Marcos, Matthias. I thought we were friends. Friends trust each other, communicate with each other, they don't stab each other in the back on a whim. Silence reigned between the two of them, Twilight staring down into the mud as she waited for an answer. It did not matter if it was from Matthias or Celestia, just anyone talking would be fine at the very least, it could give her someone to vent at. Matthias said. I'm sorry. Twilight raised her head, looking at Matthias out of the corner of her eye. I'm sorry that my accusation has caused you distress, and well, it's probably shot our working relationship to the warp, all things considered. I wanted to give up on zealotry and caution, really, but I could not. For that, for not sticking to what truly matters for the Imperium, I am justly blamed. Twilight turned her head fully towards Matthias. I am a soldier of the Imperium, and my duty is to protect it from all possible threats, Matthias continued. In seeing you as a threat, especially after all that you've done here, I was wrong, and I am sorry. Matthias closed his eyes. I pray for your forgiveness. Twilight blinked, turning more to face Matthias. She fought the dual urges to chew her lip or get back to venting, her hands trembling as she struggled to speak. That Eldar had spoken at length about what she was willing to give up. Perhaps it had challenged Matthias as well. Thank you, Matthias, she said finally, sighing as tension flowed out of her. It really means a lot for me to hear you say that. Matthias nodded, another pause reigning before he looked to Celestia. Empress, he said. Are you sure you will be needing my assistance? Battling chaos is not exactly in my area of focus. I do not need you as a warrior now, Matthias, Celestia said. A guardian of secrets, perhaps, but not a warrior. The Inquisitor seemed comfortable with this, if a nervous expression and a flex of his mechanical hand could be seen as comfortable. Twilight said nothing. The revelations of Matthias were still ringing in her head, even if he was willing to let it pass and Celestia was ready to keep it that way. She looked at him, still keeping her eyes averted to avoid direct eye contact, as if she expected to see the same man she had known in days before. All she saw as an Inquisitor. That, Twilight could not accept. Eldar. Celestia had wondered when they would begin to make their presence known. They always seemed to stick their noses into her plans, for better or worse. But that was before they had started to seek Twilight out, if Matthias' comments were any indication. The Inquisitor was also a problem. A good man, perhaps, but just a man when all was said and done. Keeping him close to Twilight could deter him or others from prying too much, but it was yet another factor that she needed to keep an eye on above all others. And that was before factoring the Eldar, and their interest in Twilight. Twilight stood off to her left in the battered amphitheater Celestia had picked for her meeting. She had said little since the meeting with Matthias, shying away from all eye contact as she made herself as unseen as possible. Celestia had hoped for more time to speak to her, to assure her that everything would be all right and get assurance that she would be able to move on, but Twilight would not say anything. Not that Celestia could blame her. Not with all that had happened. The object of Twilight's distress was seated far to Celestia's right, head down. Celestia did not need a mental probe to sense Matthias' fear and shame, a constant struggle that rose and fell every time he glanced up at her and Twilight. She would let him have his moment of shame, and then he would need to return to serving the Imperium. All that remained was for Twilight to accept his trust once more. A shimmer to her right heralded Corax's arrival, the Primarch stepping out of the shadows before speaking. The Lion will be here shortly, he said. I sense Terra is distressed. Matters have changed, Corax, Celestia said. However, it is not my place to say more on the matter. Corax nodded, turning slightly as he watched the entrance to the amphitheater. As if on cue the Lion appeared, flanked by two champions from among the Dark Angels. He was battered, dried blood caking around deep rends in his armor, but he strode with confidence down the steps towards Celestia, his head held high. The fact that he was carrying the severed head of a tyrannid swarmlord probably helped him keep face. Johnson, Celestia said. I thank you for joining us, and congratulate you on your victory over the Tyrannids. Such as it is, Johnson said, dropping his trophy at Celestia's feet. The insect proved difficult, but I managed to strike it down before the rest of the fleet suffered its end. Impressive, Celestia said, giving Johnson a smile. I have no doubt there will be greater victories to be had in the coming days. No doubt. Johnson looked to Celestia's left, regarding Twilight for a moment. The Lion's jaw twitched, as if he were about to say something, but the moment passed before he looked back to Celestia. We are assembled. What is our next objective? That is a most difficult matter, Celestia said. She raised her hand, light shimmering around it before her magic constructed an image of the galaxy. The Hive fleet is dead, struck down by an enemy I have never faced before. It calls itself the Dark God, and I believe it is a great manifestation of the ruinous powers. I traversed the Eye of Terror several times during my exile, Corax said, frowning. I have heard no mention of this Dark God anywhere. I know, Celestia replied, looking to her sons. Which means it is far more ancient than anything I have faced, ancient enough to have been forgotten entirely, or it is a new god of chaos rising to take the place of the old. Either way, it must be killed. Why have you not done so already? Johnson asked, folding his arms across his chest. Celestia hesitated, her free hand twitching ever so slightly. I cannot, not yet, she said. This creature's power is in ascendance, drawn by Lorger's preaching and sorcery. In time I will be able to challenge it, but we must break its power before it can cause too much damage. Johnson gave a grunt, but his silence afterward was enough to say he understood. With the Hive fleet struck by this dark god, no doubt other factions of the traitors will be massing under its banner. Celestia's image shifted to a fortress world, a world ringed almost entirely by the Eye of Terror. Most likely they will breach the Cadian Gate and advance southward for Terra. Your task will be to make sure they do not get there. It sounds like you are resigning Cadia to destruction, Corax said, frowning. Celestia gave a heavy sigh and dismissed the image. I must take in all possibilities, Corax, she said, hanging her head. Cadia may stand, or it may fall. We must be prepared for all possible outcomes, no matter how unsavory they may be. Corax fell silent. Celestia waited for several more moments before speaking again. If possible, you two are to fortify and hold Cadia at all cost. Should that not be possible, the traitors must be contained within the segmentum obscurus. Choke points at Agrippina, Fenris, and Armageddon should be sufficient for that task. Us? Johnson asked. You will not be leading the defense? Celestia hesitated. A full dossier on the Eldar's presence would only raise more questions from the Primarchs than she was willing to answer, and with time as narrow as it was they could not waste any with suspicion or questioning. No, she thought. That is what the old me would have done. I cannot allow my sons to fall to confusion and mistrust again. I must return to Terra, Celestia said finally. From there, I intend to use the old webway portal within the Imperial Palace to find the Black Library. There are questions I have concerning our enemy that perhaps only the Eldar can answer. Are you sure bringing the Xenos into this matter will be worth it? Corax asked. There is little love between us and the Eldar, and bringing them in may only see more of our people killed for their schemes. Rushing forward blind will have a worse result. Celestia countered. At the very least, I might be able to convince some of the Eldar we share a common enemy in this dark god. There was a pause, Celestia's gaze drifting until it fell upon Matthias still seated off to the side. Inquisitor Matthias, you can stop hiding now. I have a task for you in Terra. There was a pause before the Inquisitor rose and crossed to the others, keeping his head down to avoid eye contact with Celestia or the Primarchs. You summon me, Empress? Matthias asked. I have transferred a special package over to your ship, Celestia said, giving Matthias a small smile. You and Terra are to take it to the planet of Solemnus and trade it for the unbound flame, which is in the possession of the Lord of Solemnus. When you have collected it, bring it to me on Terra. Matthias had already started to pale as soon as Celestia had said the word Solemnus. He massaged his head, nervously looking between the Primarchs and Celestia as he struggled for the right thing to say. Are you sure you would not prefer to execute me now? He asked. Corax and the Lion looked to Celestia, eyebrows raised. Please don't ask me. I do not send you to Solemnus to make war, Inquisitor, she said, turning her focus fully on Matthias. You are merely there to bargain for the unbound flame. With your resources and Terra's talent for speaking to those who would not otherwise listen to reason, I am sure you shall secure the artifact. Celestia looked back to Twilight, the girl flinching away as she continued. Is that something you think you can handle, Terra? Why yes, Twilight stammered, thumbing the hilt of her sword as she continued. I think I can. Good. You two will leave immediately. Twilight swallowed, but nodded and moved to leave as Celestia turned back to the Primarchs. Now, on to the matter of the next stage of the campaign. A moment, student, Johnson said, Twilight stopping and turning towards the Lion. I heard of your rallying of the city defenders. A little sloppy, perhaps, but you do appear to have some talent for command, even one as small as this. Oh, thank you, my lord. Twilight gave a polite nod. The Lion's jaw twitched, the Primarch falling silent. What I suppose I'm trying to say, he continued, is that I was not entirely correct about your military skills. The Empress was wise in choosing you for a student. Celestia blinked but said nothing. The Lion was complimenting a mortal? She could not remember the last time she was witnessed such a sight. Then again, she had not seen the Lion in almost 5 billion years. Thank you, Lord Johnson, Twilight said, a small smile flashing across her face. The Lion remained as stern as ever. My favor is limited, though, he said. You will have to impress me again if you are to keep it. Twilight gave another shaky nod, stepping further away as she departed. Matthias hesitated, but soon he too left the amphitheater, keeping a fair distance away from Twilight as the two disappeared from sight. A fracture, perhaps, but then Twilight always seemed adept at handling such matters. Empress? Celestia turned back to Corax and Johnson. You were going to discuss our reaction to a possible chaos incursion? Right, of course. Celestia nodded. We must not let ourselves get distracted, after all. Chapter 2.13, 4 into 1. With a resounding roar, the berserkers of the World Eaters charged across the field, axes and swords raised as they eagerly searched for the foe. Scattered among them were a score of demons, bloodletters and bloodcrushers howling with glee in preparation for slaughter. Their targets were hunkered down within the ruins of an old chapel, plasma cannons and heavy bolters blazing as the horde of chaos charged forward heedless of loss. Neither side cared for losses. Battle was to be had. Towering over the World Eaters was a massive demon, clad in brass armor and carried forth on black wings. He carried with him the great, blood-splattered chain-axe Gorefather, the roar of the blade rivaling the bellowing of the horde beneath him. The demon hovered over his army, searching the lines of the enemy for the one who had continued to elude him for time immemorial. Angron, Primarch of the World Eaters, was on the hunt. Eventually, he found suitable prey. His target was a dreadnought holding fast among the line of defenders. It was a magnificent machine, scratched grey armor complemented by golden iconography of a long and glorious history. A great wolf's pelt was draped around the dreadnought's torso, the fur rippling as the machine hammered the advancing wall of World Eaters with its assault cannon. It gave no apparent attention to Angron, focusing its might on rallying its brothers and smiting the demons and traitors before it. Angron roared before diving down, bringing Gorefather up in preparation to strike. The defenders turned their weapons against the Primarch, but only a few shots found their mark before the demon struck. The first of Angron's victims died swiftly, Gorefather reducing a score of them to nothing more than shredded meat as its master advanced on the dreadnought. The machine stepped back, assault cannon blazing as it faced down Angron, but the armor of the demon Primarch was too great for the weapon. "Demon," Bjorn the fell-handed rumbled. "You think to best me here? As we have in times before, the wolves of Fenris will not yield." Angron said nothing coherent, his bellow shaking the very fabric of reality before he charged forward, sweeping Gorefather down in an effort to cleave the dreadnought in half. Bjorn was ready, though, catching the demonic weapon with his power claw and shifting to avoid the whirring blade. Angron roared again, rushing forward to bowl over Bjorn, but the Space Wolf dreadnought sidestepped the Primarch, unleashing one last blast of fire from his assault cannon into Angron's side. This only served to anger the demon more. Gorefather swept out, the flat of the axe smashing into the side of Bjorn's chassis. The assault cannon crumpled to uselessness under the sheer force of the strike, the ammo belt detaching and spilling shells on the ground. Angron shifted the blade and struck again, sparks flying as Gorefather ripped through ceramite and steel with contemptuous ease. Bjorn drew back, his assault cannon arm ripping from the dreadnought and falling to the ground as he braced for another attack from Angron. Angron charged, and Bjorn stepped into the strike for his own attack. He raked True Claw across Angron's chest, black blood splashing across his gauntlet as he tore 3 scars into the demon's hide. Angron bellowed in rage, staggering back as Bjorn followed up with a blast from True Claw's heavy flamer, burning promethium ignited against the Primarch's armor. Angron howled, bringing Gorefather around to strike Bjorn, the dreadnought stepping back to dodge the sweep of the chain axe. "As we defied you on Armageddon, so we defy you here," Bjorn said, catching another strike from Angron with True Claw. "I am Bjorn, and I shall not be broken here." Angron growled, slamming his shoulder into the dreadnought as he broke from their latest grapple. He brought the chain axe up, glaring down at Bjorn as he planned his next move. "Die." With a single flap of his wings Angron took flight, his wings buffeting the rest of the battlefield as wolves and berserkers clashed. He dove down again, sweeping Gorefather low to catch Bjorn off guard, the dreadnought stepping back in an effort to bring True Claw around to intercept the strike. But it was to no avail, Gorefather biting deep into the steel as the strike lifted Bjorn off his feet. A flash of sparks, and the dreadnought's legs and remaining arm tumbled away, the battered chassis crashing to the ground as Angron leered down at his opponent. "You will not strike me down, demon," Bjorn said, even as the rest of the chassis began to fade. "I have done my duty, and you have failed." "You will die," Angron snarled as he raised Gorefather up for a final strike. "All of you mewling pups will die." Angron. The demon Primarch had little time to react before a frost axe sank into his neck, black blood flying away. Angron roared, thrashing his head to free himself of the weapon, drawing Gorefather back to defend himself from his new opponent, his real target. He stood over the fallen dreadnought, axe and sword at the ready. Like Bjorn, his armor was a light gray, though centuries of combat and other wear and tear had worn his heraldry down to an unfinished steel. His cape and shaggy mane of blonde hair rippled in the wind, giving the man an aura of calm as he stared down the demon Primarch. Leman Russ, Primarch of the Space Wolves, grinned as he stood his ground. 15,000 years I've hunted you," Russ said, his grin growing wider. "You certainly got uglier. I think it's an improvement." Angron merely snarled, revving Gorefather in challenge. Russ whipped the axe of Hellwinter around as he brought his sword, Mjalnar, up into a guard position. "I also see you've become a coward. Scared, are we?" Angron roared and charged, bringing his axe up for a downward strike. Russ snorted and charged, scissoring his weapons to intercept Angron's attack. As soon as the chain axe connected, Russ was on the move, twisting his axe away while slashing across Angron's side with Mjolnir. The demon Primarch bellowed, catching Russ in the gut with the flat end of the chain axe as he whipped around, but the Wolf King easily rolled away and sank the axe of Hellwinter into Angron's shoulder. Angron shook free, sweeping Gorefather at his opponent but only finding air. Russ chuckled, twirling Mjolnir around before he lunged forward towards Angron. The demon Primarch swept his axe downward, deflecting Russ' sword before smashing his shoulder into the Wolf King. Russ rolled with the strike, but could not bring the axe of Hellwinter up to block Gorefather as the chain axe scraped across his armor. Angron roared and attacked again, Russ blocking with Mjolnir as he struck out with his own axe. He dug his heels in, keeping both of his weapons down in preparation for Angron's next attack. "You're weak, Angron," Russ laughed. "Is this all your pathetic blood god has to offer? I've seen Fenrisian pups stronger than you. I'd ask you for a challenge, but I feel I'd have more of a challenge against a senile old man in a drinking contest than fighting you." Angron charged, using his wings to cover the distance between him and Russ with ease. Gorefather crashed against Mjolnir and the axe of Hellwinter, Russ pressing back to redirect Angron to the right. He slipped his weapons out from under the chain axe and attacked, but Angron blocked with the hilt of Gorefather and jabbed his elbow towards Russ' face. The Wolf King ducked back, just in time to dodge another strike from Gorefather as he struck at one of Angron's wings. Angron twisted around, smacking Russ with a wing before bringing Gorefather down. Russ's armor held as the chain axe scraped along his back, long enough for him to squeeze out and roll to bring his weapons around. Angron advanced, raising his axe for a final strike, but Russ stabbed out and sank Mjolnir into Angron's thigh. The demon Primarch howled as Russ used his new handhold to pull himself back to his feet, smacking the axe of Hellwinter across Angron's face to knock the demon away. Russ chuckled again, spitting away a few drops of his own blood as he faced down the demon once more. "If you think to finally best me, you're going to have to try harder." Angron snorted, flaring his wings as he took Gorefather in a two-handed grip. Russ drew the axe of Hellwinter back and charged, aiming for a downward strike to cleave Angron's skull. Before the two Primarchs could connect, a column of red light blasted from the ground beneath Angron's feet. Russ pulled back, raising his weapons to shield his eyes as the light consumed Angron and his army, the demon roaring in outrage as he struggled against the light. Red flashed to light, even Russ flinching away as the sky was consumed by brightness. The light dissipated, and the World Eaters and their allies were gone. Russ slowly lowered his weapons, searching around for any sign that the demons were merely tricking him. "No, Angron does not learn. Report, my sons," he called, turning back to his lines as the survivors of the 13th Great Company and Bjorn's newcomers pulled themselves from the rubble. "We've lost contact on all fronts, my king," one of the Wolf Lords of the 13th said, dropping a dead World Eater champion at Russ' feet. "None of our rune priests can detect anything beyond the standard tides of the Imperium. The hordes of Angron have left." Russ cursed, turning back to the carnage before him. The wolves had spent days taunting and skirmishing in an effort to draw the demon Primarch out, and now this? More fallen sons and Angron spirited away by dark magics? "Calm, Russ," he thought. "The hunt continues. It would do not good to act rashly." "Gather the wounded and dead," he said, clamping Mjolnir to his hip before continuing. "We'll return to our ships and plan our next move. Perhaps a new assault might gain Angron's attention once more." He paused, turning his head back towards his sons. "Will Bjorn walk?" "The chassis is a loss," one space wolf said. "But the sarcophagus appears undamaged and responsive. The old wolf will walk again, my king." "Good," Russ chuckled. "I would hate to lose another friend in this god's forsaken place. Now my sons, the hunt is on." Cadia hovered just as the edge of reality, a bastion of order before the realm of chaos. Star forts and battle fleets hovered before it, waiting to blast any sign of an incursion back into the void where it belonged. On the surface, billions of soldiers and tanks awaited those that slipped through the blockade, eager to throw back the tides of chaos as they had innumerable times before. Just out of sight rested Cadia's doom. It was a great craft, greater than any star fort in the Imperium save perhaps the Rock. Its hull was smooth and precise, crafted from a dark obsidian-like metal that hummed as it drifted on the edge of the Eye of Terror. Only a small fleet of warships guarded it, most bearing iconography of the Word-bearers or Iron Warriors, but only a small fleet was needed when considering the destructive power of the ship. The last Blackstone fortress waited for its masters to arrive. It would not have to wait long. Magnus stepped through the warp portal, his eye adjusting quickly to the low light of the fortress command bridge. Lorgar was there, unsurprisingly, seated on a command throne with his chin resting on his knuckle. Before him stood a second figure, A giant clad in steel-gray Terminator armor standing with his back to the Primarch of the Word-Bearer staring out into the void at the fortress world beyond. Magnus knew the two had seen him enter, but their own squabbles meant they paid him no mind. "I'm growing impatient with your theatrics, Lorgar," said Peturarbo, Lord of the Iron Warriors. "We have a perfect firing solution, and plenty of Imperials to use as an example." "The fortress obeys my command, Peturarbo, and I will not destroy Cadia until we are all present," Lorgar countered. "Have faith, though, that this demonstration of the Dark God's power will be more than enough to shatter the Imperium's strength." "Bah! Those that have faith are merely shirking their ability to act with their own strength. I have told you before I have no interest in your Dark God, only in the death of our enemies. Perhaps after this day, you might be willing to see things my way." Peturarbo snorted but said nothing more. Lorgar looked to Magnus, giving the Primarch of the Thousand Suns a smile that was anything but friendly. "Magnus, how pleasant of you to join us." "Have I snubbed you in some way, Lorgar?" Magnus asked. "What is troubling you now?" Lorgar frowned, turning his head to look back at Cadia. "I am doing my best to avoid admitting Alfarius was right," he muttered. "The Emperor has a parasite clinging to his shadow, one that might prove to be a stumbling block to our plans." Magnus raised an eyebrow at this as Lorgar conjured an image. It was the woman from the fleet, the one the Emperor seemed to favor for whatever reason, staring into the void with a look of defiance about her. "One woman has you on edge?" Magnus asked, keeping his voice calm so his own reservations would not be betrayed. "Her naive optimism has made her adept at deluding the fools of the Imperium," Lorgar replied, dismissing the image. "It is a trouble that will make the coming war more difficult unless it is dealt with." "So deal with it," Peturarbo said, not bothering to turn to face the other two Primarchs. "This is one mortal. Step through the warp and strike her down. She has the protection of the Emperor, for now." Lorgar countered, finally rising from his throne to cross to Peturarbo. "Unless you think engaging the Emperor so early into our campaign is prudent, I do not see any reason to fight a battle I know we will lose." "There are other means of striking," Peturarbo said. "And the Emperor's vigilance cannot stand forever. Again, you rely too much on the strength of your Dark God rather than taking action for yourself. I cannot say my confidence in your planning has improved." Lorgar bristled, but said nothing. Magnus focused his attention on the world before them, mulling over what he had gathered from Lorgar's frustrations. "That child can fluster Lorgar? Not a particularly impressive feat, but for a mortal he massaged his chin. What is it that makes her so special?" His thoughts were interrupted by a horrid stench wafting through the bridge, Magnus shifting his energies so he did not have to take in the reek of rotting flesh and rusted metal that preceded the arrival of Mortarion. "Lorgar," Mortarion said, his voice phlegmy from whatever plagues resided within him. "I trust that this visitation will be brief?" "Why the rush, Mortarion?" Lorgar asked, turning to face the Primarch of the Death Guard as he drifted in on insect-like wings. "We stand at the precipice of victory, of finally breaking through to ravage the Emperor's precious Imperium, and you already wish to leave? I am wounded, my brother." "Though your display with the Hive fleets was impressive," Mortarion said. "I have been unimpressed by previous outlets for my vengeance. But perhaps you might be able to change mind." "No doubt." Lorgar stepped towards his command throne. "Though once Fulgrim arrives, I will need your help. And Magnus, of course." "How so?" Magnus asked. "For the next stage of my plan, I need the 4 servants of the late Chaos Gods," Lorgar continued. "You and Mortarion have arrived, and Fulgrim is on his way. Angron, though, will require a bit more force to pull away from his adventures." Magnus grimaced. Interrupting Angron's rampages would be a tricky endeavor, even if the World Eater's Primarch could not kill them. "I suppose Fulgrim will be of some use in that regard." "Very impressive, Lorgar," Fulgrim said as he slithered out of the dark. The Primarch of the Emperor's children was beaming, his 4 arms clasped behind his back as he took a place near the center of the room. "Slaying the hive mind so quickly? Truly that was a display of power unmatched by anything shown before. To hear the death of billions of minds at once?" Fulgrim gave a breathy sigh. "Pure, blissful agony. Please tell me there is more to come." "It would be like you to be easily impressed," Peturarbo grumbled. Fulgrim stopped, glaring at the Iron Warrior's Primarch. "And what is that supposed to mean?" he hissed, reaching for 2 of his swords before Lorgar spoke. "Peace, brothers," he said. "Let us not squabble at the moment of our great victory. Fulgrim, if you would please take a spot over there, we can begin." Lorgar gestured to a spot to his left with his mace. Fulgrim regarded him for a moment, but his hands dropped away from his weapons and he moved to take position, taking a position next to him so that he, Fulgrim, Lorgar, and Magnus formed a rough circle. Peturarbo stayed put, continuing to glare out at Cadia as the Imperial fleet shifted about. Lorgar raised a hand, power swirling about him as he began to speak in the dark language of chaos. Magnus said nothing, but shifted his power once more to lend some strength to Lorgar's incantation. Already he could feel rage, hatred, bitterness, traits that Angron carried with abundance and made him easy to spot even in the tides of the warp. There was a blunt shift, Magnus furrowing his brow as his and Lorgar's magic worked to circumvent Angron's psychic defenses. Finally something slipped through, and a column of red light shot from the empty space between the Primarchs. That light soon produced arms, wings, weapons, until finally Angron stood before them, his face twisted between confusion and outrage. When he spotted Lorgar, outrage won over and the demon Primarch advanced on his brother, drawing his chain axe back for a strike. "Hold, Angron," Lorgar said quickly, raising his hand as if to shield himself from the World Eater. Angron hesitated as Lorgar continued. "Think not of this as the Emperor kidnapping you from your brothers on Nuceria. Your legions await you on nearby worlds for a far greater slaughter than anything you could have found within the eye. Stay, and the whole of the Imperium will be yours to take vengeance upon." Angron hesitated again before scoffing, slowly lowering Gorefather and trudging to a spot near Mortarion. The Primarch of the Death Guard gave Angron a brief look of weariness, but said nothing more as all assembled turned their attention to Lorgar. "Brothers, welcome," he said, raising his hands towards the ceiling. "Not since the heresy have so many of our number assembled in such a place, at such a great moment of triumph. We are the heralds of the true order, a great symbol that shall last for an eternity, the death of the Imperium, and the ascendance of the dark god of chaos. Before us stands the world of Cadia. It is where the first revelations of the primordial truth were revealed to me, and stands as the first gate between stagnant order and liberating chaos." Lorgar scoffed. "I will not weep long once it is destroyed, for its death heralds the fall of Terra and the fall of the pathetic emperor of mankind. Behold, for I have brought the last servants of the four before me." As Lorgar spoke, Magnus could feel something twisting around his legs, binding him in place. He tried to use his magic to deflect the binding, but instead his power mingled with the force tightening around his legs. The other three had reacted with varying intensity, from Fulgrim's bemused pleasure to Angron's barely contained rage. They are the remnants of the old gods, forgotten in the ascension of the true master of chaos. But they need not be left to the side, but bound before the dark god, four brought into one. No sooner had Lorgar finished the last sentence did Magnus seize up, his arms falling to his side as a force yanked him against his restraints. He could feel power flowing from his body, twisting through the structure of the Blackstone fortress, the craft humming with its own power. Magnus could feel the structure shifting, drifting towards Cadia as it took up an ideal firing line. The defenses of Cadia have withstood great warp storms, he thought. What makes Lorgar think a warp-based weapon will have any effect? That is what you would like to think, isn't it? A voice rumbled in Magnus' mind. I am beyond your pathetic changer of ways. I am beyond the blood god, the prince of pleasure, and the lord of plagues. I am beyond the schemes of Xenon's deities and so-called star gods. I am the dark god of chaos, the warp made manifest, the doom of man. Now watch, as Cadia finally dies. Magnus' vision went black, the Blackstone fortress shaking as its main weapon fired. He could not see anything, pain shooting down his back and filling his body. He grimaced but said nothing, biting back a scream as more power and pain flowed through him. His muscles strained, his eye twitching as he tried to break through the pain. Pain was all he could find. Pain, and memories long left buried. Magnus. He heard the harsh voice of the Emperor echo through his mind. What have you done? Please hear me, Emperor, Magnus said, his astral projection stepping towards the Emperor. You are betrayed. Horus has turned himself over to foul powers and even now marshals an army to march on Terra. We must act before he arrives and destroys all you have fought to build. You disobey my commands, use foul conjurings to try and contact me, destroy my great work in your foolish attempt, and you dare to accuse Horus of treason? The Emperor's eyes flared with power. A century's worth of work, gone, because of your stupidity. Emperor, I only wish to save the Imperium, Magnus pleaded. I can fix the damage. It's a webway portal, no? I've studied them during my time on campaign, and I can contain the energies before they grow too much. But please, you must stop Horus. He will turn on you. Horus has been nothing but loyal to me since I found him, and is 10 times the son you are. What made you think I would favor you in this matter? Magnus stammered, his projection wavering as the Emperor continued. Magnus, You have betrayed me and the Imperium, and for this sin you must be held accountable. Please, Emperor, Father. You are no son of mine. The Emperor growled. We will discuss the manner of your punishment when you arrive on Terra. Begone. Magnus' soul snapped back, the Primarch staggering forward as the bonds around him were released. Blindly he summoned his blade, taking the halberd in his hand as he prepared for an attack. From what? Slowly Magnus' vision returned, and he blinked his eye as the rest of the world came into focus. The other three appeared similarly agitated, Angron in particular twitching as he swept his gaze about, Gorefather growling in his grasp. Each of the other three now bore a small black mark upon their foreheads, a mark of their new allegiance. Magnus guessed. Lorgar was passive, the head of his mace resting on the floor as he stared out through the black towards their target, Magnus following his gaze as he took in all before him. The Blackstone Fortress, supercharged with the remnant energies of the four mixed with the power of the Dark God, had torn a massive gash through real space straight towards Cadia. The Cadian pylons, those pieces of archaic xenotech that had held the warp at bay for so long, had slowed the progress for a few moments perhaps, but had done little to correct the reality that Magnus saw. The entirety of space before him was consumed by the warp, calm space replaced by familiar twisting patterns and images of foul creatures. Cadia, the last bastion of mankind, had been cleaved clean in two by the strike of the Dark God, infernos of warp flame racing across its surface as all life was scoured away. Abaddon's bungling did have some hidden fruit, Lorgar mused, grinning as the others regained their senses. He knew the power of the pylons, a little push was more than enough for him to destroy enough for this to work. Magnus looked up at Lorgar, the word-bearer still grinning. It was not by my doing. The Dark God had foreseen this triumph in days long past. Most impressive, Fulgrim breathed, stretching out as he surveyed the damage. What else is there to be seen? More warp storms will begin to break out across the Imperium, Lorgar said, stepping between his brothers as he watched the destruction of Cadia. Thousands of planets will die like Cadia, their pathetic populaces screaming in agony as they are sent to serve the Dark God. The might of the Space Marines will fail in the face of the true power of the warp. Every fool that does not bow to the powers of chaos will tremble at the display of my power. He raised his hands towards the ceiling again. Behold, my brothers. As Cadia dies, so we shall rise. We are the heralds of the end times, and the galaxy will burn in the fires of our vengeance. If we do not burn in the fires of the Emperor's wrath first. All present turned as Alfarius stepped from the darkness. Lorgar sputtered as the Primarch of the Alpha Legion spoke again. Apologies for interrupting, Lorgar, but we have unfinished business to attend to. I told you before that you are free to do whatever you like. Lorgar growled. Just do it away from my sight. I still await the troops you promised me to recover the Anathame blade, Alfarius replied. Or were you too caught up in religious fervor to remember your promise to a brother? I consider promises to you to be as hollow as the Emperor's. Lorgar flicked his hand outward, a warp portal forming before him before he turned back to the group. Mortarion, Angron, there are still survivors on Cadia. Let's remedy that fact, shall we? Angron grinned, hefting his axe as he all but jumped into the portal, Mortarion and Lorgar following close behind. Magnus watched in silence as they departed, his head still throbbing against the mark that no doubt rested upon his forehead. His sorcery will only lead to more difficulties, Peturarbo grumbled. Alfarius, you say you need troops? I have several thousand slaves who are of no use to me, even if your scheme has no need for them, it would be better if you got them out of my sight. I will find some use, Alfarius said before his gaze focused on Magnus and Fulgrim. Though perhaps, brothers, you might be able to lend me more direct power. The battleship Riffical emerged from warp space at the head of the Space Wolf Armada, just in time to watch as the Eye of Terror blossomed forth from Cadia's death throes. Even within real space the ships rocked from the force of chaos washing over them, warning klaxons blaring as Gellerfield strained to hold back the tide. The Astartes were all veterans of centuries of warfare within the Eye of Terror, but even they could still feel some form of anxiety when the warp threatened to overtake them. Lehman Russ stood in silence on the command bridge, watching as a world died and the warp was set free. Every instinct of his told him to move, to take up axe and sword once more and dive back into the madness, perhaps even strike the head off the snake while they still gloated over their victory. It would be easy, a challenge worthy of the Wolf King and his sons. Every instinct save one. Orders, my king? One wolf guard asked from below. Russ continued to watch the destruction, his hand running down the hilt of Mjolnir. We move, he said. We find worlds that have not yet been struck and warn them of the coming danger. We dig in, we fight, we die, for that is the task we have been given as legionnaires of the Imperium. I do not expect any of us to survive this time, my brothers, but with axe and sword we will see the traitors die with us. The wolf time is upon us, my sons. May the Emperor take pride in us, for battle awaits. End of chapter 2.13, 4:1.